Okay, so I don't know how many times I have to try this video, but it looks like my computer does not quite have the the working memory to be able to run the camera filming me and do stuff on the internet at once. Big surprise. So now I'm trying my phone. So the disclaimer that I gave last time is I am in my grandma's house in her sewing room. And now I'm filming this on my phone because filming it with my computer just was not happening. Okay, so, oh, and one last disclaimer. I don't really have much in the way of video editing software on my computer. I think I have iMovie, so I might give that a try. But if the quality is pretty low, blame it on the software. Don't blame me. Alright, so last week the assignment that I put up on Blackboard was all about formal qualities, what a piece of art looks like. Uh, those things include things like line and texture and value and, of course, color. Uh, and then building off of those, the principles of design, things like harmony and creating emphasis or rhythm, those are all great. Um, and in some instance, we kind of need those. Uh, if we take a look at if we take a look at something that we often call abstract, though I like the term non-representational, if we take a look at something that is non-representational, not representing anything, just something like this Mondrian painting, uh, if we take a look at that, then there's very little we can do except evaluate it for its formal qualities. Um, we can't necessarily say, oh, look at that horse, because there is no horse. There's blocks of color, there's lines, but there's nothing that we can necessarily say, oh, I like it because I like those things. If you happen to love blocks and lines, great. Uh, but if you're like most people, you're like, what's going on here? That's fine. Uh, so it's very hard to talk about that without just keeping it at the formal aspects. Um, what are the colors used? Are they working together? That those big black lines, are those working? Um, the proportion of those components in the piece, is it creating some sense of movement, some sense of rhythm? Is it moving your eye around? Uh, and that happens with a lot of art. I mean, you could evaluate any art by just those things, but sometimes you have to evaluate art pretty much only by those things. Besides this piece by Mondrian, we could also look at this piece by Arlene Sheshit. She's a ceramic artist. She does a lot of mixed media things. Uh, but there's no. It's very different than Mondrian, but still, there's no exact like image that we can say, oh, I like that, because she does a lot of blobs and stuff. So, uh, that's all great for non-representational work. We almost have to evaluate it only formally. Um, but what happens when we do have things like imagery? Because we love imagery. Uh, so what happens when we do stuff like that? And once you start having things like imagery, you you need to start thinking about subject matter. Um, in this case, I'm going to define subject matter as like, what are the images? What are the symbols that are in the work of art? Um, if we take a look at this piece, number 3, by Andy Warhol, um, we see a banana. So what? Uh, does that banana mean much of anything? Not particularly. Um, it by itself just kind of is a banana. Um, so that's a part of the subject matter. There in this piece, there's his name, there's a banana. There's not much else. If we look at another piece that's a little bit more complex, we'll do number 4, by Jeremy Brooks. Uh, there's more to look at. Still banana themed. I'm sticking with that for right now. Uh, and full disclosure, I don't know all of Jeremy Brooks's. Uh, I don't know what he's talking about in this piece in particular, uh, but there's a lot more than just a banana. So there's Jesus emerging out of that peeled banana. Um, he has the blue cloth on him, which I think has its own meaning in Christianity. Um, it's on a plate. That plate is framed by a very ornate frame. Um, and the title is called Peeler. Now, I know that Jeremy Brooks likes to have like word play and puns in his titles and his work. So this piece might have more meaning than I realize. It would not be the first time I've been fooled by a Jeremy Brooks piece. Uh, so if that means something and I'm making a fool of myself, it's because I'm ignorant. Uh, I don't know all the hip lingo. But uh, all these things are kind of subject matter. There's Jesus, there's the blue cloth, there's the banana, um, there's the fact that it's on a plate, there's the frame. Now, um, hopefully you can see that all these things together make something that is far more complicated than just a banana. Suddenly, Jesus with a banana means something different than Jesus and a banana. When they're together, it means something different. Uh, so that's where the viewer can start to create meaning in what they see. Uh, we have a lot more to go off of, so therefore we can make a more complex story, a more complex situation. Uh, let's see. So truly, this comparison of Andy Warhol versus Jeremy Brooks in this case is just to try to illustrate that the more symbols, the more subject matter you have, the more meaning you could create. Um, because if you only have what you can see, uh, it's it's obviously a lot easier to create meaning when you have more things to play with, more things to think about. So if subject matter is things that we can see, symbols, imagery, uh, those things that are on the canvas or easily seen. Um, from there, we can build off of those things and create content or concept. Uh, you kind of need those things to kind of create concept in a lot of cases. Uh, it's not impossible to do it without them, but it's a lot easier, I can tell you that. Uh, so let's build off of this and think about uh, image number 5. It's a cross. And to most people in the Western Hemisphere, uh, we have a very good idea what a simple cross means. It's just a general, it's one of the most basic uh, symbols used by the Christian religion. Uh, it doesn't necessarily have to mean Christianity or anything to do with faith, but in most cases we see a simple cross like this, we know what it means. Uh, but let's look at a different kind of cross. Image number 6. Suddenly changing the proportions and changing the color, it's suddenly about the medical field. So little things like this, we bring some content into things. We get it from what we can see, the symbolism, the subject matter, uh, but of course it all builds on each other. Um, seeing this cross, it just reminds me that the Red Cross is going to start calling my cell phone every couple of days once I'm eligible to give blood again, especially with this coronavirus. I already know they're probably going to say, "We need your blood now more than ever." with time. So anyhow, just the changing of the color, it's a huge departure from just the simple cross. Um, and now we can push this idea even farther. Um, let's take it away from something that we immediately know as like a symbol, a huge symbol for a big organization or or religion. And let's take a look at image number 7. Uh, so this cabinet by H.C. Westerman, um, it's pretty similar to that original cross. It's brownish tones. It's a similar proportion. Uh, you could argue that it has something to do with Christianity, but there's one thing that makes this a lot more compelling, a lot more interesting than just a cross. Uh, Doi, it's a cabinet, um, so that suddenly makes it more interesting. Uh, Now, if we're going to complicate it even more, suddenly we might take a look at those hinges and go, is that going to work? I'm no carpenter, but I know that hinges don't necessarily work when they're put on a door that way. Uh, so, so maybe H.C. Westerman is not just maybe he is talking about religion, maybe he's not. Um, maybe there's something there where Jesus was a carpenter, so he's kind of like making this joke. Maybe it's like a criticism of religion, this promise that there's something behind on the other side of the door, but we can't access it. Um, Whatever the case, this is where all those things like subject matter, the hinges, the knob, the cross, they're working together to make a a comment on something, a complex idea. And that's where content builds off from subject matter. Uh, it's very hard to talk about content without subject matter, and it's quite easy once you have enough pieces of subject matter to create ideas. I often think of it kind of like subject matter is almost like words. It's hard to write a sentence or a paragraph if you only know like 6 words. That's how I am in Spanish. Yo hablo español. Perfecto. I'm not very good, so all my sentences sound pretty much the same. But the more words you know, the more subject matter that's in a piece, the more that the viewer could start to have an idea of what the heck you're talking about. So we've got subject matter. Those are the building blocks that we can build content out of. The artist physically tries to build content, uh, but it's all about what the viewer is doing. So the more building blocks you have, the more the viewer can build. Hopefully, what the viewer sees and what you see are working together. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes people purposely make it confusing. But all the same, uh, there's multiple times where building content kind of happens. Uh, but there's another very big, big influence on content, um, and that would be the idea of context. Uh, so, context, it could mean where the piece of art physically is. Um, Maybe it means that you know who made it or where they were from. Maybe it means knowing some of the political turmoil going on during the time of the making of the piece. Um, you know, Things that the artist is interested in. Uh, a title could be seen as context. Um, Really, I think of context as anything that can change the meaning of the piece without being a direct visual thing. Um, so, in my opinion, the king of context is this piece, number 8, by Marcel Duchamp. I personally love Marcel Duchamp, so if you hate this piece, keep it to yourself. Keep it to yourself. But I think he's kind of this piece is kind of king when it comes to thinking about context. So, if you couldn't tell, it's a urinal taken right off the wall, placed in the gallery. Um, and a lot of you guys might be going, oh my god, this is not art. That's fine. You might be thinking, it's art, but it's bad. That's also fine. You might be thinking, oh, it's art, it's just lazy. That's also fine. You have that right. And you might be correct. But this piece was made about 100 years ago, um, and when it was exhibited, it caused a lot of stir. Uh, it upset people. The original is thought to have been destroyed because people were so angry about it. Um, but the fact that the artist, who was very well known at the time, uh, he had he had quite a name for himself as a painter. He enters the show, and instead of entering a painting, what does he do? He says, "I dare you to kick me out of this show. I'm gonna put a toilet on this pedestal and see what you guys do." And that's what he did. Um, and suddenly, because he was well known and because he put it in a very well respected show, and he said, "This is art now," suddenly the definition of art had to be changed. In that context, the urinal was not in a bathroom, it was in the gallery. Suddenly that said, "This is now art. Think about it as art." Um, so that's just something to consider because while this while piece number 9, The Thinker, was not in the same show, Marcel Duchamp was suddenly saying, "You have to think of these in the same way." Uh, and I find that super exciting. And it's just all about the context. Taking it out of the bathroom, putting it into a fine art situation, and saying, "This is art now. Uh, you have to think about it like art." Love it or hate it, he changed art forever. And, um, and it all has to do with context. So, there's more to it, but if we're thinking about how to evaluate the success of a piece of art, uh, always remember you can always fall back on the formal qualities. Uh, if we look at piece number 10 by Henry Moore, do the colors in this piece create any sort of rhythm? There's not very many colors, but do they create any rhythm? Uh, is the composition moving our eye around the piece? What are we looking at? Um, there's texture. Uh, there's kind of a sense of physical weight, but all the cutout areas are kind of giving the piece more interest. Um, and there's very flowing kind of shapes. Uh, so you can always evaluate it on the formal aspects. But of course, most art has more than just textures, more than just colors and shape. Uh, as humans, we love symbols. Whether it's a cave painting from France, number this is image number 11, um, or something from this decade, like this sculpture by these two brothers, Kyle and what's their name? Kyle and Kelly Phelps. Um, they're twins. Uh, we love imagery. So when we look at something like this sculpture, we have images. We see human figures, there are their clothes, the US flag. All together, these visual components, along with their facial expressions, are kind of this dire situation. Um, and then we, and then there are also things like context, titles, where the piece is situated, where it was made. Um, if we take a look at this painting by Otto Dix, context means a lot. So this is image number 13. We see some pretty grotesque looking dudes playing cards. I don't know, they're having an okay time, I guess. Um, they're all, at least all of them, are missing some part of their body, whether it's the ear or the legs or the arm or something. Uh, they just kind of look like gross, sadly gross guys. Um, but the context suddenly makes the piece more gut wrenching. This piece was made, I think it was right after World War One, and it's depicting men who were made unwhole by the First World War. If we think about the First World War, mechanized killing was never so easy. Between things like the machine gun and like a plane and a tank and mustard gas, people were dying way faster than any other war. It was just so easy to kill people with those trenches. You just sit there and wait, and they come over the mound and poof, you kill them. Easy peasy. Uh, so, in a way, this painting, because I know that it's post World War One, suddenly these guys are all victims. Um, they're unwhole, like I said earlier. Um, So, knowing the context makes the medal on the one guy's chest seem a little bit like futile or almost comical, like, hey, you earned a medal, aren't you proud of yourself? Uh, it's kind of sad. Um, it makes the skull that's in the light bulb seem a little bit more ominous. It even makes, the fact that they have legs and things similar to the furniture, the chairs and the coat rack, the fact that they have legs that are similar to that kind of makes it even a little bit more tragic. They're less human. Um, they're not cyborgs, like cool, heroic, futuristic cyborgs saving the day from aliens. No, they're just guys who are missing parts of their body and doing the best that they can to stay alive. So I'll end all of this with a look at a piece that I think is very interesting because I'll start by looking at it as a formal thing, and then I'll build off of that and start thinking about the subject matter, and then I'll start thinking about the content, what those things might mean, and then I'll think about context, and we'll see how as you think about it, those different layers make the piece more complicated, and I would argue more interesting. So if we look at image number 14, if we're just looking at this formally, what do we see? We see a lot of shade, a lot of warm colors, a lot of yellows and oranges and browns. Um, it's a lot darker towards the outside. It's considerably lighter towards the middle, that focal point. I'm going to address what that focal point is in a second, but for right now, I'm just going to talk about it like I don't know any nouns. So it's a lot brighter in the center. Let's see, we can tell that there's some depth because on that focal point, it's sharper when it's closer to us and then it kind of fades or blurs away. So we know that there's some physical depth. Let's see, we can see some bubbles. I don't know if those are like, they kind of look like bubbles. I don't know if they're like in the liquid. I don't know, you pour yourself a Mountain Dew and there's like bubbles on the side of the cup. I don't know if it's that. I don't know if they're physical scratches on the outside of the container, but um, they're there. Um, they kind of create some different lines and things. The piece is fairly symmetric because of that focal point. It's almost perfectly symmetric, and with the way the light is. So, if I'm looking at it just formally, sure, pretty successful. Um, there's not like some purple squiggly line going all around. That would make it seem a little bit, I'll say, bad. So overall, I'll say, yeah, it's good. That's good. Now let's dive a little deeper. What are we looking at? So hopefully everyone kind of recognizes this as Jesus on the cross. Um, he seems to have some sort of golden glow because of the lighting and the liquid. Um, it seems very hopeful to me. Now that I'm thinking about this, I've got my halo on as well. Uh, that happens all the time in art. We wanna exude, I don't know, power or or something very very important. We kind of shroud it in gold. Um, all sorts of things. Different cultures have like sun gods. like Apollo in Greece. Um, or even if you think about Zeus up in the clouds, he's probably surrounded by white clouds, lightning bolts. He's looking pretty dope. The Buddha's often depicted in gold. Um, so the idea of Jesus kind of glowing, exuding this, it's not very out of the ordinary for art. It's something that's used a lot. Uh, Jesus on the cross is a hugely influential image. Um, so I'm thinking about Christianity. I'm thinking about this kind of warm glow. This seems pretty positive. That's great. Uh, and if that's the intention of the artist, then he did a great job. So let's go a little bit deeper. Context. This piece was first shown in 1987, so it was the late 80s. That doesn't do that much for me. It's not like, oh, Wham was really popular back then. That's important. For me, the year isn't that important right now. It's by an artist, Andre Serrano, um, and I know a little bit about his work. He did a lot of pieces with uh, religious iconography, so this kind of fits in with his body of work. Um, the fact that it's a photograph, it kind of tells me that it's pretty recent. It wasn't from the Middle Ages, so uh, I guess I could have figured that out without even knowing the year. Uh, but the title is really what makes this piece more complex. The title is, let's see where I have it. Here it is. The title is Immersion. Now, of course, that could be alluding to the fact the crucifix is immersed. It's submerged in this liquid. Maybe this light is like talking about me as the viewer being immersed in Jesus's love. That's a pretty common thing in Christianity. Um, I've heard those words a lot, especially in the Christian religion. We think of things kind of just radiating out and warming us with love and stuff like that. But there's a little bit more to this title. There's two words in parentheses that change it a lot. So it's not just immersion. It is immersion, and then parentheses, piss Christ. So suddenly, one word being added to this title totally changes the idea of the piece. What seems very positive and glowing and warm, um, changes with the addition of that word piss. Um, you know, the idea that the liquid is urine suddenly makes me think, oh, this isn't a piece that's like celebrating faith or celebrating um, someone's religious beliefs. Instead, it's making fun of. It's stomping on them, um, which is kind of like it's a touchy subject. So that makes it very complicated because until now I thought the piece was pretty positive, and now I see that it's not. But then again, there's more context. What happens if we read a little quote by Andre Serrano himself? Um, so listen to this quote: "I had no idea Piss Christ would get the attention it did, since I meant neither blasphemy nor offense by it." Oh, okay. And then he goes on. Let's see, where is it? "I've been Catholic all of my life, and I am a follower of Christ." Oh, interesting. Uh, and then the second quote: "What it symbolizes is the way Christ died. The blood came out of him, but so did the piss and shit. Maybe if Piss Christ upsets you, it's because it gives some sense of what crucifixion actually was like. So, it's an unpleasant idea, but he has at least a tiny point there where, a lot of times if we have anything in our digestive system, when we pass away and our body relaxes, it comes out. Um, so, in a way, when we knew the title, it's like, oh, immersion, that's nice. Piss Christ, ooh, that's bad. And then he says, I meant no offense by it. I think it's actually kind of a positive thing. You go, huh? Um, and I think Serrano is purposefully playing around in this gray area, trying to make people think things and then trying to make them think the exact opposite. Um, and I think this piece definitely can be viewed as very offensive. Uh, I'm at my grandma's house, but I do not intend on showing her this piece of art because I do not think that she would like it. Um, so whether you find it blasphemous or you don't care or you love it, um, I think this piece is kind of a great educational moment because formally it seems good. You start thinking about subject matter, still seems good. You start thinking about content, sure. And then the more and more you know about it, the more those kind of positive things start to get blurred. They get muddied in the waters. Um, so that's why I think this piece is very exciting to think about, because it's just a photograph. But the more you know about it, the more complex and difficult it becomes. So, so hopefully after all of that, you can have some idea of different ways that we can take a look at art. The formal aspects, great. We can almost every piece of art we can evaluate just on those things. Uh, it gets more complicated and exciting when we start thinking about the subject matter and the content. Um, and the context can somewhat help create that meaning, um, which is something that we were hopefully starting to do when we were still meeting at Hood. Uh, and then the schism happened, and we're going to have to abandon that. But uh, if you follow the rest of this assignment, uh, we're going to try to re-tap into some of those things and kind of play around with content and subject matter and creating meaning because you know what's art if we can't create any meaning ever? It's boring. So hopefully this isn't too offensive to you and you can just say, you know what, it's a piece of art. It was made 30 years ago. It doesn't matter. uh, but all the same, we're going to try to tap into some of these ideas of how to create meaning. Uh, you don't need to be as potentially offensive as Serrano. If you want to, that's your prerogative. I'm not going to stop you. I literally can't.